Hello Horror Hounds, welcome to my horror house after a Christmas and New Year's break that went on a little longer than I had originally intended. I wanted my first video of 2024 to be about a film that I can be completely enthusiastic about, 100% positive about. And I've chosen Hammer's The Plague of the Zombies because not only does it tick both of those boxes, I think it's also kind of still underappreciated and not as well known as I think it should be in the sort of great zombie canon of horror movies, which is strange for two reasons. One, it's Hammer Horror's one and only zombie movie, and for two, it acts as a fascinating bridge between the cinematic world of the zombies, which were Haitian and voodoo related. It crosses that chasm and sort of holds hands, if you like, with George Romero's retinkered ghouls, the reanimated dead that came in Night of the Living Dead just a couple of years later and then just took zombies to a whole new level. It involves itself with Sir James Forbes and his daughter Sylvia. Sir James receives a letter from his best and brightest medical student, Dr. Peter Thompson, who now has a practice down in Cornwall, a sort of secluded Cornish village. And Dr. Thompson writes to him and says that there is a disease that is sweeping the community here that has absolutely baffled me. People keep dying and I can't get to the bottom of it. Please, please, my old teacher, my old mentor, come and help me. So Sir James and Sylvia travel down to this Cornish village, meet up with his old student, Peter Thompson, and his wife, Alice, who is Sylvia's old school friend. But it's not a happy reunion. The town is under a kind of pall. This plague has set the superstitious villagers almost at the throats of Dr. Thompson. It's your typical Hammer fare, even though this is set in Cornwall. It is essentially set in Hammerland because Bray Studios and the sound stages of Bray stand in for Cornwall. It's a little bit of a pity that there wasn't any sort of location shooting going on, because the Cornish landscape would have added a fantastic sense of doomy, gloomy gothic to this, and a verisimilitude that you would just be able to point a camera at the landscape and get money coming back in. But Hammer is as Hammer does, a tight hold on the purse strings and small budgets. So what you get is an aesthetic that feels very familiar. It is a Hammer movie and it feels like a Hammer movie. And to be honest, for this grumpy old horror fan, that's a welcome feeling. Hammer movies at this point in my life feel like chicken soup while I've got a cold. They feel like a warm blanket on a cold night. They're welcoming and enveloping, and you just dive into Hammerland. For all that they're trying to tell a different kind of story of a different kind of monster, The Plague of the Zombies is a very familiar kind of Hammer story. In fact, it almost feels like an adaptation of Dracula with the serial numbers filed off. Sir James Forbes is your scholarly Van Helsing character who has been called in at the behest of a younger doctor, one of his students. So Dr. Thompson here stands in for Dr. Seward. The Sylvia and Alice dynamic and even what happens to them matches very closely with Lucy and Mina under the control of, in this case, Squire Hamilton, who, whilst not a foreigner, has been off in foreign lands, has spent many years in Haiti, strangely enough, and has come back and has sort of mesmeric control over some of the populace and certainly these two beautiful ladies. Dracula in all but name. What makes it more interesting than that is a healthy application of the British class system, which makes this film strangely political and also weirdly, strangely prescient, but probably of its time as well. For you see Squire Hamilton and his gang of thugs who race around the countryside in red fox hunting attire, and they actually do go fox hunting, but they also go hunting for people as well. And there's a very disturbing sequence where they actually find Sylvia out on the moors and sort of hunt her down on their horses, take her back to Squire Hamilton's abode, and are essentially going to gang rape her until the Squire intervenes and saves her. So the villains of this piece are the aristocracy, as is often the case with Hammer movies. Sir James is also part of that upper crust aristocracy as well, it must be said, and he does use his position to bully his way into getting what he wants from the police and the community, because the community, the working classes, do seem want to cow down to men of a better class than them. But ultimately what Squire Hamilton is doing is he is using the voodoo rituals he learnt in Haiti to kill off the working classes of the village, and then once they are the reanimated dead, he sets them to work as essentially slave labour, zombie labour in the tin mines that had been closed. He's reopened the tin mines to try and remake his fortune using zombie labour, which is clearly an analogy for slave labour. This idea of a zombie workforce links it absolutely directly to the Bela Lugosi film White Zombie, where it almost passes the baton forwards towards something like Night of the Living Dead. Is an absolutely fantastic sequence where the young doctor and Sir James go to the grave of his recently deceased wife, Alice, played amazingly by Jacqueline Pearce, by the way. Sci-fi fans will know Jacqueline Pearce as the baddie Servalan from the BBC sci-fi series Blake's 7. If you haven't watched it and don't mind looking past budgetary restrictions, I strongly recommend watching Blake's 7. It happens to be my favourite sci-fi series of all time. But anyway, back to the movie. Alice is dead and they go and visit her grave. Does this seem an awful lot like Van Helsing and Suedet all going to visit the grave of Lucy once Dracula has killed her? Yes, it does. But that doesn't matter, because the sequence we get after that, it's a double whammy. First of all, a very creepy, very eerie sequence where very close up on Alice's face, we see it slowly morph from still having the flush of life and the flush of youth on it to greying and degrading and becoming a ghoul, until she eventually, inevitably, opens her eyes and gets up and comes out of her grave and goes towards her husband with a strange and eerie smile across her face. This could easily have been something from George Romero's Night of the Living Dead a couple of years later. And Sir James then takes a shovel to her, decapitating her, and her husband, her widower, collapses, and then has the most astonishing dream sequence where all the graves empty themselves of the dead. Hands are pushing through the ground, faces come up through the ground, and then the shuffling zombies make their way towards him, growing in numbers. A sequence that wouldn't look out of place in a Night of the Living Dead movie or Michael Jackson's Thriller. Weirdly, here in nascent form is the future of the zombies in a strange dream sequence. What you have in the sort of Haitian voodoo zombie movies, including this and White Zombie, I Walk with a Zombie, the zombies aren't the threat. It is the person that is controlling them and creating them that is the threat, as it is here with Squire Hamilton. But in this tiny sequence, you see the possibility of what will come to pass when the dead rise from the grave and they are themselves the threat, the slow-moving threat in numbers. That's not even the first time you see a zombie in the movie. The first time you see the zombie the first zombie you see is a little earlier, where Sylvia is following Alice, who's gone out at night almost somnambulistically. I mean, exactly like how Mina follows Lucy in Dracula. She loses track of her, reaches the tin mine, and a zombie emerges on the top of a bluff carrying the dead body of Alice, and it screams at her and throws the body down the hill. And it's such a stark, genuinely scary image. It's one of the best images of horror I think that Hammer have ever produced, up there with all the classic images of Lee, Cushing, vampires, werewolves, absolutely rollicking stuff. Where it maybe falls down a little is it doesn't have an antagonist of the quality of Count Dracula. We all know that Squire Hamilton is an absolute wrong, and it's not the mystery that is unraveling in this is what is he doing with these rituals, and it's only in the final act you find out about the zombie workforce. So the zombies aren't the threat. He's a sort of much more nebulous threat than Dracula is. So it doesn't have that sort of propulsive engine of narrative that something like Dracula or even Hammer's adaptation of Dracula has. But as an example of a movie that asks you to enter the wonderful world of Hammerland and see a mystery unfurl and give you images that I think are just as good as any of the images on many of their much more well-known movies, and to also create a vital piece in the puzzle of the zombie canon, an integral stepping stone between the zombies of old, the voodoo zombies, and the reanimated corpses of George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. In and of itself, it's a fantastic movie. And as part of the greater tapestry of zombie movies, I think it's an absolutely vital piece. So I think worth your time on an entertainment level, and worth your time on a slightly more sort of academic level if you're at all interested in the history of zombies in cinema. There's no getting around, I think, Hammer's The Plague of the Zombies as an absolute cornerstone of the evolution of zombies.
I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.